Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are trudging through the swirling snows of ancient Siberia, where the air tastes like frozen copper and the sun hangs low, reluctant to rise. A few steps off the icy ridge, you spot a strange sight, an arc of ivory rising from the permafrost, elegant and deliberate, not the chaos of natural death, but something arranged. More appear as you squint. A semicircle of mammoth bones, no scattered bits from a predator's feast, no crushed rib cages, just bones, peaceful, positioned, like a farewell from one giant to another. You probably won't survive here longer than an hour. The cold doesn't care. It doesn't brag or boast, it just waits and it always wins. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Your boots crunch through the snow as you shuffle closer to the exposed ridge. Under the drifts, Time's skeleton yawns open. Mammoth tusks curve like question marks frozen mid-thought. Ribs stretch upward, not collapsed. The pelvis, massive, unmistakable, rests flat, surrounded by smaller bones in what looks like a deliberate arc. And that's the first prickling at your neck. Not just that these bones are intact, but that they seem placed. Something cared how this body lay. You blink, half expecting to see humans with flint tools. But there's nothing. No sign of butchery, no fire pits, no spears, no scratches where wolves tore in. Just the snow, and the whisper of wind pushing silence into your ears. The area isn't random either. The bones rest in a shallow basin where the snow melts slower and the winds don't bite as hard. It would take effort to reach this spot, especially for an old dying mammoth. Why here? You move around the edges of the site, careful not to step too close as if disturbing a sacred ground. A second skeleton peeks out a few meters away. Another one beyond that. They're spaced evenly, all similarly intact, all arranged, if you can use that word without sounding unhinged. There's a theory still debated naturally that mammoths may have had designated dying grounds just like elephants today are rumored to. Scientists grumble about the elephant graveyard myth, but they'll admit mammoths weren't dumb. Their brains were nearly as large as ours. They had strong memory centers, social bonds, grief behaviors, and they lived in icy family dramas stretched across decades. So what if they really did have death rituals? What if some of these sites weren't the aftermath of climate or predators, but deliberate journeys to familiar places? You kneel, gloves brushing a femur twice your height. The edges are smooth, no gnaw marks, just time. This one might have died 5,000 years ago, or 50. In the cold, bones lie still for ages, preserved in ice like secrets that refuse to rot. Nearby, a spiral of small stones rings a tusk half sunk into earth. Probably coincidence. Probably. But then again, there's a pattern in nature's chaos too, right? Here's something we know. In 1901, Russian explorers stumbled upon a collection of mammoth remains in the Bareilles River Valley. Not one, not 10. Over 150 individuals, many complete, many eerily clustered. It wasn't a mass death by flood, it wasn't a trap, and it wasn't all at once. The bones came from different centuries. Historians still debate whether these were mammoth cemeteries or just spots where ice preserved them well. But some archaeologists have pointed out the peculiar organization of remains. Herd members seem to return generation after generation to die here, like a whispered instruction passed down, go there when it's time. Even odder, a few bones at these sites appear to have been moved after death. Rearranged, not by flowing water or soil slumps, but by something alive, something with a trunk, maybe. That's not science fiction. Modern elephants have been observed returning to the bones of their dead. They pick up skulls, carry tusks. They don't eat them, they just touch them, hold them, place them gently down again. Some will revisit the same bones for years. So what if mammoths did that too? What if these fields of fossilized remains aren't just traps of time, but testimonies to mammoth mourning? The odd fact for tonight, a mammoth's tusks grew in rings like trees. Each layer marked a year of life. Some even showed stress stripes recording famine or trauma. In a sense, each tusk was a diary, a cold, curved autobiography. You lean back, hands resting on your knees. The wind hushes a little. Far in the distance, a reindeer calls out once, then stops. You're alone again. Maybe you're not looking at death at all. Maybe you're looking at memory. These bones might be the only monuments Ice Age creatures left behind. They didn't carve statues or write epics. They didn't build ziggurats. But they might have walked year after year toward a hill where the wind curved gently and their ancestors waited under the snow. That would be a kind of monument, too. And as you rise and walk away, careful not to disturb even a tusk, you wonder if thousands of years from now someone might find your bones in a pattern. Might think you two had your rituals. Might stand puzzled in the wind and whisper, someone cared where this one lay. You trudge through ankle-deep snow breath, fogging in front of you like steam off a tired kettle. The trail's not obvious at first, just a subtle indentation between wind-slick ridges, but the more you follow it, the more it starts to make sense. Here, a faint line of broken shrubs. There, the scuffed imprint of massive feet frozen over and refrozen 100 times. Something walked this path with purpose, and then you see her, old, slumped, alone. A mammoth cow towering and shaggy, her flanks sunken, and her pace a dragging metronome against the winter silence. She shouldn't be alive. She knows it too. Every step is deliberate. She's not foraging, not escaping. She's going somewhere. Somewhere she remembers. It's eerie how far she's come. You pass trampled snow that's melted and refrozen from her body heat. Droppings dried hard as stone. Ice cracked where she stumbled. All of it leading in a single, unwavering direction toward a hollow in the distance shadowed by wind-stunted pines. No herd, no calves, no urgency. Just that steady rhythm of bone meeting snowfoot after ancient foot. This is not wandering. This is pilgrimage. Here's the historical bite. Some paleontologists believe mammoths lived up to 60 years, maybe more. That's a long time to memorize the land. And mammoths, like modern elephants, likely passed down geographic memory, the idea that certain herds inherited migration routes across generations. The older ones knew the old trails, knew where the water froze last, knew where the wolves didn't follow, and maybe, just maybe, knew where the dead had lain. And here's the part that doesn't quite fit the fossil puzzle. Several mammoth grave sites, especially in Siberia and Alaska, show bones from many individuals, yes, but with an unusually high number of elderly remains. Not a balanced demographic, not the random spread you'd get from catastrophe, but old mammoths, weak ones, solitary walkers, like they came here on purpose. She pauses up ahead, you notice, under a crooked tree bent by a century of storms. The way she lifts her trunk is almost expectant, as if she recognizes the tree. Maybe she does. Maybe her mother died here. Or her mate. Or her sister with the notched tusk who disappeared one spring and never came back. That's a strange thing to think about in the Ice Age, that memory might be this enduring. You remember when humans evolved, their brains ballooned to accommodate language tool storytelling, but they were also social. They kept their old ones around, because old ones remembered. Maybe mammoths weren't that different. The wind sharpens suddenly, cutting through your scarf, and the mammoth keeps walking. She limps now. Her right hind leg stiff with something prehistoric and painful, but she keeps going. You wonder what drives her, instinct or something else. Odd fact break: mammoths had 6 sets of molars in their lifetime. Once the last set wore down, that was it. No more chewing, no more eating, no more living. That last toothless year could stretch out slow and starved if they couldn't find soft food. Some researchers suggest that this very issue is what sent some mammoths looking for places to die, places with mud, or moss, or quiet. And that might be what's guiding her now. Her last tooth is gone. She can't chew, she won't live long, but she can still walk. And she still remembers where her kin once lay. Historians still debate whether these mammoth death walks were intentional migrations or simply the effect of aging animals falling behind, pushed into remote corners. But too many of these old bones show up in clusters. Too many with signs of long-distance travel before death. Not chased, not hunted, just gone from their herds. You stop following her at the edge of the basin. She doesn't notice you. Or she does and doesn't care. The snow is deeper here. The wind strangely quiet. The air smells of pine peat and something faintly musky like the ghost of wet fur long since melted. She lowers herself with effort, her body trembling, knees folding awkwardly. She lies in the snow, not flailing or panicked, just resting. Her head turns slowly until her tusks line up with a pair half buried a few meters away. You almost miss them, so smooth, so still. And you realize she's not alone. You can make out 4 other skeletons in the bowl of the valley, barely rising from the snow, quietly waiting. You step back. This is not your story. The mammoth breathes deeply once, then twice more. Her eyes close. A few birds overhead circle but don't land. The wind doesn't stir, the trees don't creak. Even the cold seems to hold its breath. You've just watched a creature walk itself into the arms of death. With dignity, with direction. It's enough to make you wonder when your own time comes, will you remember where to go? You leave her there, blanketed by snow already beginning to fall again. Somewhere behind you, the path will freeze over by morning. The snow has thickened by the time you circle back to the herd. You find them standing in a wide clearing, massive shadows, barely stirring, as still as tree trunks rooted into the earth. But one is missing. You count them again. The old cow, the one with the frostbitten ear and dragging gait, isn't among them. They know. You watch, breath catching in the cold air as the nearest mammoth lowers its trunk to the frozen ground and exhales. A long, low sound, like wind tunneling through a canyon. The others respond not in panic, not in alarm, but in something mournful, soft, repeating. It isn't panic when they turn toward the valley where she went. It's reverence. You follow, boots crunching through their tracks, trying not to get too close. The air feels charged now, not in a spooky way, but the way it feels before an orchestra begins. Something ancient is about to play out. And it does. They arrive at the shallow bowl, forming a wide circle around the fallen matriarch. None of them touch her at first. The calves cling to their mothers. The younger bulls stand back hesitant. But a few of the elders step forward and stretch their trunks toward her body. They touch her cheek, her flank, her tusks. And then one by one they kneel. It's not full-on collapse, it's more of a bow. A pause. A collective breath held. You count 3, 4, 5 doing it. Even the calves mimic the motion. Then a trumpet. Low, not loud. A grieving exhale more than a cry. Grief in the ice wind. Modern elephants do this too. When a member of the herd dies, especially one they knew, they linger. They return. They visit the bones, sometimes for years. They nuzzle the skull. They bring branches. They stay long after the body has decayed. Mammoths, by all accounts, have the same emotional depth, same structure, same bonds. Their herds were led by matriarchs who remembered landscapes and enemies, who raised daughters and guided migrations. When such a leader dies, it is not just a loss. It is a wound stitched into the herd's rhythm. And you're watching it now. The herd doesn't leave. They stay into the dark long after snow has blanketed the body. They circle her. They lie down near her. No eating, no foraging, just being present. Here's your historical fact. Fossils of mammoth herds have been found in what looks like defensive circles. Heads facing outward, tusks turned toward imagined predators. But in death, some are found close together, sometimes even overlapping, as though they stayed by each other until the very end. Some scientists argue this is random, that it's just the way gravity and terrain pull large bodies together. But they can't explain the tender arrangements. A baby mammoth tucked beneath a rib cage, tusk tips crossed like fingers, skulls laid cheek to cheek. Historians still debate whether this is coincidence or cognition. Is it burial ritual instinct, or simply the emotional consequence of loss in social animals? Odd fact of the hour, mammoths had an excellent sense of smell, stronger than modern dogs. They could detect distant storms, predators, and water from miles away. But that same olfactory sensitivity also meant they could probably smell death long before they saw it. Imagine how that shaped their rituals. Imagine how they prepared for the end. Back in the present, one of the calves moves forward. Its small trunk curls toward the snow-covered flank of the fallen elder. It doesn't touch, just hovers there as if unsure. Then the calf steps back, burying its head under its mother. The cold deepens and the sky above turns violet-black. Stars peer down through streaks of cirrus clouds. No one moves. The herd stays, as if waiting for some unspoken signal. You sit on a low rock near the ridge, wrapped in your coat, unwilling to break the spell. For once, even you, the intruder, know better than to get closer. Eventually, as dawn stretches a pale bruise across the horizon, the herd begins to rise. One by one, they don't trumpet, they don't mourn aloud. They simply turn slowly, deliberately, and begin to leave. But not before one of them, the new matriarch, perhaps scoops a trunkful of snow and lays it across the old cow's face. Gently, with precision, like covering a friend with a blanket. You don't need a language to understand that. This isn't nature red in tooth and claw. This isn't some cold, empty wilderness where animals die alone and are forgotten. This is memory. This is ritual. This is goodbye. And even after the herd disappears beyond the ridge, their presence lingers in the trampled snow, the softened edge of the body, the bowed branches of trees. They'll be back next year, or the year after that, because some places, no matter how cold, are worth returning to. It's just before twilight when you stumble across the strange ring. At first, you think it's a mirage, something your eyes invented from the ache of cold and too much thinking. But no. You blink, shuffle closer, and it holds. A circle, or maybe a spiral. 12 mammoth tusks jut from the ground like curved sentinels, each embedded upright in the permafrost. Some have snapped with time, their tips worn down to chalky stumps. Others still hold their curl like frozen question marks, half-answered. You walk the perimeter in slow steps, heart thumping louder than your boots. This isn't a natural scatter. It's not the aftermath of a stampede or the remains of an ice trap. The placement is deliberate, intentional, like a gathering, like a ring of chairs around a fire that burned out long ago. The Duvani Yar Formation. You didn't mean to find it, but you've heard stories, half-whispered among researchers who don't want to admit it out loud, the idea that mammoths might have created spatial patterns with their own bones, or returned to sites where bones were already laid, adding their own to the ring. Historians still debate whether this phenomenon is real or just wishful thinking layered onto geological chance. Maybe floods moved the tusks into formation. Maybe humans did it. Maybe it's all nonsense. But it doesn't feel like nonsense when you're standing inside the ring. The snow here is oddly thin. Maybe the wind avoids this place. Maybe the ground remembers heat. Or maybe the weight of memory presses so heavily on this patch of earth that even the snow hesitates to bury it. You kneel beside one tusk, brushing it clean with your sleeve. It's huge, nearly as long as your body, and the grooves along its surface catch the low light like fingerprints. But this isn't forensic. This is something older, something sacred. Odd fact, break tusks aren't just for fighting or foraging. They're living structures growing throughout a mammoth's life, layered with calcium, collagen, and memory. In fact, Scientists today use tusk chemistry to track migrations like a GPS made of bone. You could, in theory, map an entire mammoth's life from the inside out. That makes the ring feel even stranger, like a diary arranged in a circle, like stories told in ivory instead of ink. You lie on your back in the center just for a moment. The sky above is a deepening cobalt clouds racing past like forgotten thoughts. Around you, the tusks reach upward, not threatening, not grim, just present. You're in the eye of something ancient, and that's when you hear the wind shift. It whistles through the tusks in just the right way, like a flute pressed to your ears. Not music, exactly, but not just wind either. A sound that feels shaped. You sit up heart-thudding and you suddenly wonder how many of these formations exist. Duvani Yar is famous, sure, but what about the ones lost beneath deeper snow or mistaken for natural collapse? What if this isn't rare? What if this is common and we've simply forgotten how to see it? Here's a historical nugget to gnaw on. Some mammoth sites in Ukraine and Russia have yielded circular structures made almost entirely of bones, ribs, tusks, skulls. Most archaeologists attribute them to human hunters using bones as building material. But the arrangements are often so precise, so symmetrical, that some researchers have half-joked or not joked that mammoths might have been involved too. Helping or returning to a known space. You remember when we talked about memory earlier? Here's where that ties in again. Elephants today have an uncanny spatial memory. They remember watering holes from decades ago, grave sites, trails across hundreds of kilometers. If mammoths had the same, what's to stop them from returning to bone circles left by earlier herds? A self-reinforcing behavior, a learned landmark, a tradition. Not so different from us, really. You stand again brushing snow from your coat. The ring is silent now, just 12 white arcs against an expanse of gray. But you can't shake the feeling that this was a place of meaning. That generations of mammoths might have passed through here, pausing, recognizing, remembering. It's a graveyard. Or a monument. Or maybe both. The snow begins again, soft and steady. It doesn't land on the tusks right away. It hesitates, just like you did. You take one last look before stepping out of the ring and whisper, because it feels right to do so, "Good night." Whether or not anyone hears is beside the point. The pit is easy to miss, half covered in wind-swept drifts, and tucked against a ledge of ancient frost-shattered rock. You might have walked right by it honestly, if not for the cluster of ivory tips jutting up from the snow, like bleached fingers reaching for light. But it's not just this presence of bones that draws you closer, it's how they're arranged. Not scattered, not chaotic, just settled neatly, quietly, as if they were laid to rest. You kneel by the edge, brushing snow with your gloved hand until the pit's full shape reveals itself, roughly oval. Just deep enough that a mammoth calf could lie within it curled. And it did, apparently. You can see its bones in the center, small by mammoth standards, but still the size of a sofa. And here's the odd part, there are no signs of violence. No predator marks. No gnawed edges. No bite-shattered bones. No claw-scraped rib cage. No panicked struggle gouged into the frozen earth. Just peace. It feels wrong somehow. The Ice Age wasn't known for mercy. You'd expect death to come with a mess, blood, desperation teeth. But this calf seems to have died here in place undisturbed. And the depression, it doesn't look like a natural sink. It looks like a grave. Not deep, not shored up with stone, but still intentional. You step back, glancing around the clearing. It's sheltered on three sides by wind-carved bluffs almost like walls. The perfect place to hide or to mourn. Or both. Here's where it gets interesting. At several Siberian sites, researchers have found young mammoth skeletons in shallow, isolated pits. Many show no trauma, no disease, just death, and they're often alone. No adults nearby, no signs of hunting tools. Historians still debate whether these were accidental sinkholes, or places where herds may have buried or at least left their dead calves with care. There's no shovel, no gravestone, But there's something undeniably gentle about these sights, something respectful and repeated across time. You wonder, did a mother mammoth dig this hollow herself? Did she use her tusks to nudge snow and earth aside? Did she return afterward alone again and again? Or did a herd gather here, silently placing snow over the calf's still body, standing vigil until the wind claimed it? Elephants today are known to do the unthinkable. They have been seen trying to cover their dead with leaves, branches, anything they can find, not for survival, not for hiding, just to cover, to mark, to mourn. So maybe the idea of mammoths doing the same isn't so strange after all. Odd fact for the campfire mammoth calves were born weighing about 200 pounds and could stand within hours. But if something went wrong, if the calf was sick or the cold too brutal, it didn't take long for trouble to settle in. In such cases, mothers would often stop moving. Stay behind, lose the herd. You imagine one such mother here trembling as her calf weakens, the others waiting unsure whether to go. Then quietly, one by one, they leave. But not before she makes this little depression in the snow-covered soil with her tusks with her feet. And then she lays her calf inside, and waits, and waits. You walk a slow circle around the pit. A few bones rest outside its edge. Tusk fragments, a small vertebra, arranged. Or the casual drift of time. The wind howls, but the pit stays still. Sometimes a place can feel too quiet. Not lifeless exactly, but heavy with memory. You're not cold anymore, not really, not in your body. The frost clings to your jacket, your boots, your eyelashes, but your breath has evened out. There's a hush here that settles over your bones. You feel like you've stepped into someone's dream or funeral. You crouch again and look at the calf's skull eyes, long gone but the shape still tender. The mouth slightly parted. You wonder what it sounded like when it cried, what it dreamed about when it was warm, what it meant to the ones who left it here. This is not just death. This is a choice. This is where to die and how to be remembered. And again, you think no tools, no language, no monuments. But memory somehow still leaves its trace. That's the thing about mammoths. They didn't build pyramids, they didn't paint caves, but their silence says something we haven't quite translated yet. It says, we were here, and we felt things too. You rise brushing snow from your knees, careful not to step too close to the rim. Whatever happened here, it happened without anyone watching. Until now. You see the shape before you, hear the sound, a hulking silhouette standing alone on the ridge, unmoving, a statue carved from fur and ice. At first, you think it's a trick of the light, the way shadows fall long and strange at dusk. But no, it shifts barely as you watch. A mammoth, just one. You pause. She doesn't. She stands over something small and still half buried in snow. A shape that should have moved, should have risen and should have squealed and clung to her leg, but it doesn't. You already know what it is. A calf, her calf. The mother sways in place, not with exhaustion, but with that rhythm living things fall into when they don't know what else to do. Rocking gently, left and right. Her trunk lifts and lowers in slow arcs, not touching anything, not reaching for food. Just moving because stillness might break her. You keep your distance, crouched behind a low bluff, as if any sound from you might shatter the quiet. The air is so still that you can hear the creak of her joints, the low hiss of her breath. She's been here a while. Elephants today have been known to do the same. A mother may linger for days beside her dead calf. She will chase off scavengers. She will trumpet warnings to the wind. And sometimes she'll try to lift the body long after it has stiffened. Not because she expects it to wake up, but because hope dies slower than the body. Mammoths with their deep emotional lives likely carry that same heavy instinct. Here's your historical fact: the brain of a mammoth wasn't just large, it was complex, particularly in the temporal lobes, the regions associated with memory and emotion. Not brute memory like where food is, but emotional memory. The kind that aches when someone's missing. She shifts again, lowering her head, letting her trunk drape across the calf's small body. A gesture so human it sends a shiver through your spine. You've seen that before, parents holding children who are already gone. The curl of arms, the hush of words too late to save. She's not protecting anymore. She's saying goodbye. Odd fact time mammoths are thought to have had low-frequency vocalizations below the range of human hearing. Deep, resonant rumbles that could travel kilometers under the ice, calling family, signaling danger, whispering comfort. Maybe she's doing it now. Maybe she's speaking into the ground. Maybe another mammoth miles away will feel the vibration and know what's happened. Historians still debate whether such vocalizations could carry meaning like language. Some argue yes, intonation, rhythm, repetition all suggest communication. Others say no, it's just instinct, not intellect. But as you watch her silently cradling what's left of her calf, you stop caring about the academic argument. Because this doesn't feel like instinct. It feels like mourning. You don't know how long she's been here, maybe a day, maybe more. The snow around her is smooth, no feeding pits, no pacing trenches. She hasn't left. She hasn't eaten. She hasn't tried to rejoin the herd. She just stays. And you realize something darker. This is not sustainable. Not out here. Not with the cold deepening and the winds sharpening and her energy bleeding into sorrow. She might die here too. And maybe that's what she wants. You want to look away, but you don't. You owe her that. The stillness of witness. She lowers herself beside the calf, folding her legs with effort, her breath coming in long, steady pulls. Her body curls just slightly like she's trying to keep the calf warm even now. You stay there until the sky drains its color, until the shadows stretch so long they erase the details of both bodies, until they blur into a single sleeping shape. Here's what the textbooks won't say. Grief isn't exclusive to humans. We didn't invent it, we just wrote it down. You step away, snow muffling your retreat, the crunch of your boots swallowed by dusk. And though the wind begins to blow again fast and sharp and rising, you swear you hear nothing but silence behind you. A silence filled with love. It begins with a groove in the snow, just a line worn shallow into a hillside where the powder's thinner and the ice below shines through. You wouldn't think much of it until you notice another, and another. Parallel paths weaving gently like the trails of enormous river snakes through a frozen sea. But these aren't fresh. They've been packed, iced, reforged by the shifting seasons, etched deeper with each passing year. You crouch and run your gloved hand along the cold ridge. It's smooth, compressed, as if thousands of feet have followed the exact same path. And suddenly, you understand what you're standing on. A memory. This is a path worn smooth by sorrow. You follow it. The trail descends through the hills past withered trees bent by generations of storms and into a shallow basin choked with frost-bitten shrubs. At the center, half hidden by blowing snow, is another collection of bones. Not a massacre site, not a predator's banquet, just more mammoths. More stillness. A place where the echoes of lives ended quietly, without violence, without fanfare. The air is colder here, but not cruel. It feels respectful, like the cold itself is holding its breath. You've seen this before, these gentle cemeteries scattered across the north, and you begin to piece it together. This trail didn't form overnight. It wasn't the result of a single migration or a herd passing once in search of better grass. This was a route revisited, rewalked, followed across centuries, maybe millennia, over and over again. Not because it was useful, but because it meant something. You glance behind you. The sun has dipped behind the hills, casting a dim lavender glow across the snow. The wind whips gently, reshaping drifts but leaving the grooves untouched. You remember when we talked about elephants returning to the bones of their dead? They also follow trails that lead to familiar trees, landmarks, places where matriarchs once stood. The same loops, the same pauses year after year. So what if mammoths did that too? Here's your historical fact. Some Ice Age sites in Siberia and Alaska show remarkably consistent mammoth pathways routes that link feeding grounds with places where multiple skeletons have been found. The distances don't always make sense biologically. They pass up easier terrain, better grazing. But the herds returned again and again to the same depressions where the old bones waited. Historians still debate whether this was pure instinct or inherited behavior, whether the young were led by memory or by the weary shuffle of their elders. But the result remains paths through wilderness that didn't just lead to life but to death, or more accurately, to remembrance. Odd fact, break mammoths likely walked up to 15 miles per day during migration. That means in a single year, a herd could travel the length of modern-day France. But returning to the same final destination, that's not just movement, that's choice. You pass another rise and spot a mammoth skull resting beside a narrow stream, one tusk cracked, the other polished smooth by time or by touch. Around it, faint footprints mostly covered. Not fresh, but recent enough to suggest others came. Maybe not days ago, maybe years, but they were here. You kneel again. Snowflakes gather on your sleeves. The silence settles around you like a blanket. What are we really looking at when we call these migration routes? Are they just seasonal paths or are they woven with meaning? Could the young mammoths have followed not just food but funerals? Could the old have taught them not just where to go, but why? You picture a young bull, awkward and uncertain, nudged gently along the frozen trail by his mother's trunk. Ahead, the place where her mother died, and beside that perhaps the bones of an older sister, or a father she never spoke of but remembered all the same. And when her time came, she led her son here, to remember, to teach him what silence meant. And he someday would do the same. It's hard not to feel something primal stir in your chest. This isn't a herd running from danger. This is a culture returning to its roots. When the mammoths vanished gradually, stubbornly over thousands of years, it wasn't with a scream. It wasn't fire or flutter fang. It was this quiet rhythm that ended. These trails that stopped being pressed into the snow. The silence that fell when there were no more steps behind the ones already etched. You stand, brushing your palms together, and glance down the valley where the grooves lead. They vanish into mist. But you know where they go. You know where they end. And if you followed far enough, if you walked day after day into the ice wind, you might arrive at the final resting place of 1,000 remembered lives. A graveyard, a legacy, a song hummed under the breath of time. And the snow would hush you, and the cold would hold you, and the wind might whisper, "You're not the first to pass this way." You find the structure by accident. At first glance, it looks like a collapsed hut, a ring of tusks and ribs poking out of the frozen soil, half consumed by creeping moss and time. It could be the ruins of some long-forgotten Ice Age camp, the kind of place where early humans huddled for warmth and cooked whatever had the misfortune of wandering too close. But the longer you stare, the less human it seems. For one thing, it's too neat. The ribs are arched in a way that doesn't suggest salvage or scaffolding. The tusks are buried vertically at uniform angles, almost like fence posts or guardians. You circle slowly, the chill air wrapping around your ankles as you move. The ring is wide enough for a mammoth to lie down inside, or several. It's not a trap. There's no sign of a pitfall. No stone blades embedded in the ground, no scattered tools. It's shelter, or a monument, or something in between. Archaeologists have uncovered over 70 so-called bone huts across Eastern Europe and Siberia, circles of mammoth bones that form walls, some with wooden frames or hide coverings dating back nearly 20,000 years. Most experts agree they were built by humans who relied heavily on mammoths for meat tools and warmth. But here's where it gets weird. Some of these bone structures show signs of being reused. Not just once, for generations. Bones moved restacked, added with care. And occasionally there are tusks placed with such precision that they don't look like supports, they look like symbols. Historians still debate whether mammoths played any role in this. It sounds absurd at first, giant creatures helping with architecture. Please. But then you look at the structure again, and it doesn't feel like it was built for humans. It feels like it was respected by mammoths. There are stories ignored in textbooks but whispered by local Siberian elders, about mammoths circling bone rings returning to them seasonally, standing near them, tracing them with their trunks. There's no scientific confirmation of this behavior, of course, but there's also no proof that they didn't. And here's your odd fact of the evening. Modern elephants have been seen stacking objects, branches, bones, even plastic barrels. They've been caught placing large items in seamy patterns and revisiting them days later. It's not art. It's not tool use in the traditional sense, but it's something, a sense of arrangement, of spatial curiosity, of intention. You duck beneath one of the arching ribs, careful not to disturb it, and step into the center of the circle. It's quiet here, more than just windless. The silence has a pulse. You stand where others might have once stood or lain surrounded by ivory and memory. If mammoths did revisit these sites, maybe it wasn't to admire human engineering. Maybe it was for another reason entirely. What if these bone huts began as human shelters, but over time evolved into something else? Memorials, markers, shared spaces between species. Imagine a mammoth calf born in the shadow of a rib-ringed hut. Imagine it returning decades later sniffing the bones, remembering something passed down by its mother's soft, low rumbles. The boundary between shelter and shrine is thinner than we think. You remember when we first saw those concentric tusk circles back in Duvani Yar? What if these structures are echoes of the same behavior? Whether started by humans or not, the bones remained. The shapes persisted and the mammoths returned. And maybe, just maybe, they added their own. You crouch and rest your hand on the ground. It's hard-packed and cold, but not dead. There's still something here, some trace of story, some imprint of the hundreds of lives that moved through this clearing, both two-legged and four. Here's your historical truth. Humans and mammoths lived side by side for thousands of years. Not always peacefully, not always knowingly, but side by side. There were hunts, yes, but there were also encounters. Stalemates, moments where neither interfered, just watched. You stand brushing snow from your sleeves and take one last look at the ring. It could have been a shelter. It could have been a grave. It could have been a conversation between species that didn't use words but used bones instead. A frozen dialogue in tusks and ribs. And the more you listen, the louder it speaks. The river is barely moving, locked beneath a crust of ice so thin it crackles under your boot with every step. You shouldn't be out here this late. The air is dipping below, teeth chattering, and the trees along the Yakutian banks have stopped even pretending to whisper. But something drew you here, and there it is. Half submerged beneath the ice, one delicate curve of tusk arcs like a crescent moon. Small, too small, calf-sized. You kneel at the edge of the frozen bank and peer into the black water below. For a moment, it's just darkness, your own reflection stretched and bent by the jagged pain. Then the light shifts and a skull comes into view. You swallow. The size, the proportions, it's unmistakably juvenile. A young mammoth, alone. You scan the surrounding banks. No adult bones, no herd, no signs of a group nearby, just this one. It's not the first time. Across Yakutia, this frozen expanse of permafrost, reindeer and memory young mammoth remains keep showing up in strange isolation, found in riverbeds, in caves, under collapsed ledges where adults never followed. Historians still debate why. Disease accidents. Calves wandering off predators. All of those are possible, yes. But there's a pattern to it, an unsettling consistency. These aren't chaotic deaths. There's a strange quiet to them. A young one, alone, unmarked, unmauled. You shuffle down the bank and step carefully onto the ice, heart thumping. The surface creaks, but holds. One hand presses against a frost-laced rock for balance as you crouch above the submerged skull. There's no sign of struggle, no sign of flailing. It's as if the calf simply lay down and the river covered it. And here's where it gets truly odd in at least 2 cases documented in Yakutian. Dig reports juvenile mammoths were found buried intentionally beneath sediment as if they'd been tucked in. Not rolled into ravines, not scattered, placed. You lean closer. The ice fogs beneath your breath. You swear you see small stones around the body like a ring. Maybe glacial movement, maybe nothing, but maybe not. Remember when we stood at that shallow pit and wondered who dug it? Here the question sharpens who left them here. Because this wasn't a herd trampling past. This wasn't an ambush. This was chosen, singular, deliberate, elephants. When a calf dies, have been seen guiding the rest of the herd away after the vigil. Sometimes a mother stays behind, sometimes not. But they don't forget. They don't just abandon. Odd fact, break elephants will occasionally attempt to cover their dead with leaves or dirt. But when that's not available, like on riverbanks, they'll use what they can chon. Branches, stones, even their own footprints to press the body down. And who's to say mammoths didn't do the same? A river might have been a practical solution. Cold, preserving, a quiet place to say goodbye. One dig site found pollen around a juvenile mammoth body pollen that shouldn't have been there naturally, as if flowers had been brought. A gesture, a tribute. Science hasn't explained that one yet. You press your hand to the ice gently. The skull stares back, empty sockets filled with shadow. This wasn't just death. It was separation. A calf left here not because it wandered, but because someone let it. Maybe even laid it down. Maybe, just maybe, with gentleness. Historians still argue whether these solitary burials were truly intentional or the tragic flukes of a brutal landscape. But as you sit here above a glass window into the past, it doesn't feel accidental. It feels mournful. It feels quiet. You rise slowly, legs aching from the cold, and make your way back up the bank. The wind picks up behind you, scattering snow across the ice and swirling threads like white hair whispering over the body below. Somewhere out in the dark, another trail waits. Another calf, another hush. And the more you see, the clearer it becomes. Mammoths didn't just die. They left traces, stories in bone, sorrow in snowdrifts. Love in the stillness of frozen rivers. You wrap your coat tighter and whisper one word so quiet even the wind might miss it. Goodbye. It's tucked into a windless hollow, barely a rise in the earth, where the snow has flattened into a porcelain crust. At first, it looks like nothing more than a chance arrangement, a tusk propped awkwardly against a stone, as if some Ice Age prankster left it leaning like a forgotten broom. But then you spot another, and another. Ivory arcs standing at angles that mimic each other. 3 tusks, each wedged between stones or balanced with care. Not fallen, not random. Someone put them there, and they're polished. Not by water, not by weather, but by contact. The outer layers are worn smooth in places too high for ice scouring, too consistent for wind. They've been touched, repeatedly. Over time, you reach out, hand trembling just slightly in the cold, and run your fingers along the nearest tusk. It's warm in the sun. Not metaphorically, literally warm. The ivory has absorbed enough of the pale morning light to lose its sting. And it holds something else, too. Something you don't expect. Stillness, reverence. You're standing in a place that has been visited before. By mammoths. The stones beneath the tusks aren't ordinary either. They're arranged, clustered in little groups. Not rings, but pairs and triplets, natural, yes, but purposeful, too. Like cairns, like markers. This isn't a graveyard, it's not a battlefield. It's something stranger, a memory site. You know how elephants today will return to where a loved one died, sometimes years later? They will stop. They will circle. They will reach out with their trunks and touch the remains, and they won't do it once. They'll do it every year, with different generations. Calves following adults. Learning the silence. So what if mammoths did the same? Odd fact, time. Mammoths had over 40,000 muscles in their trunks, each one capable of fine motor control. They could pluck flowers, snap branches, smooth sand, and perhaps touch bones. And here's the kicker. Some of these standing tusks aren't embedded into the ground in any way that suggests erosion or fossilization. They're balanced, meaning they had to be placed there while the mammoth was still active, not buried, not decayed, just remembered. Historians still debate whether these polished tusks are natural formations or signs of repeated visits by mammoth herds. It's hard to say. Bones don't come with annotations, but it's difficult to ignore the patterns. Difficult to believe that the tusks just happened to end up standing in such a way, especially not in multiple places. And more importantly, why are some of them smooth? You crouch beside the smallest one worn flat on one side, maybe the side where trunks touched it the most. 1,000 quiet caresses, not from predators, not from humans, from herd mates, from family, from memory. You remember when we talked about the old ones dying alone in valleys of silence? What if this is where the living returned after? What if these tusks were their way of saying, "We're still here. We remember." Imagine a young mammoth being brought here, stopping beside a polished tusk, its mother nudging it gently forward, letting it brush the ivory with its trunk, letting it feel the smoothness, letting it learn. The same way we teach children to kneel at graves, not because the dead demand it, but because we do. Because memory is a ritual, even without words, even without gods. You lean against a rock and watch the light shift across the snow. The wind moves through the hollow like a whisper that doesn't want to be overheard. Here's your historical fact for the moment. Tusk polishing also occurs in captivity. Elephants will rub their tusks against walls, trees, even their own pens sometimes obsessively. It's a comfort behavior, a repetitive act. Some interpret it as boredom, others as grief. Maybe it's both. You stand and take a slow circle around the cluster. There are no footprints here, no trails, but the sense of presence clings to the ground like scent, like sound, just out of reach. Something visited this place again and again and left no mess, just memory. You move on slowly, gently, careful not to brush against the tusks, not out of fear they'll fall, but out of respect, as if they might be holding up something invisible. A silence that hasn't yet finished speaking. By now you've stopped assuming anything is coincidence. The longer you wander this frozen wilderness, the clearer it becomes. Patterns are everywhere if you squint through the snow. But this is different. The locals warned you about this valley. Not with fear exactly, but with that tone people use when they're discussing something ancient, something a little too real. The kind of story passed down not to entertain, but to remember. They call it Sunke Ebe, which roughly translates as the place where they lay themselves. Venki herders say the mammoths used to go there when they were ready to die. They say you could hear the ground sigh when one arrived. And they say the bones in that valley don't belong to hunted animals or fallen ones. They belong to those who chose. You thought it was folklore, until now. You step into the valley through a narrow gap between ridges, and it's as if you've crossed into another season. The wind fades. The snow here lies thinner, like a sheet instead of a blanket. And the bones, so many bones are arranged too carefully to ignore. Not random, not scattered. Grouped, some even aligned in neat rows. Others curled fetal-like near stone outcroppings. At the highest point, you see a full skeleton spine, intact skull, lifted slightly as though looking toward the sky. A curve of tusks still proud. And on the ground nearby tracks, not fossilized, recent. Something has been here. You crouch beside a low mound where smaller bones are stacked, 3 skulls gently nestled, their tusks turned inward like petals. It's a composition, a choice. The air smells faintly of moss and frost. But there's something else, something older. That smell you only get inside deep caves and old wood earth that remembers. You pause and think about the Nanette's tale one hunter shared by firelight, how long ago the mammoths dug their own graves with their tusks circling the chosen ground before lying down for the last time. According to him, their spirits still walk the ice searching for old places to return to. Historians, of course, roll their eyes at this. Folklore, they say. Imagination. projecting human rituals onto animals. But those same historians can't explain the distribution of bones here. The precise groupings, the eerie lack of predation. Odd fact of the hour, mammoths, unlike modern elephants, had sharply sloped skulls which made digging easier. Some researchers have speculated they could use their tusks to scoop snow or soft soil, not to build but to clear. And here's the kicker one. Siberian site. Chroma River revealed. Bones packed tightly in pits with walls formed from other tusks almost like vaults. The pits weren't natural sinkholes. Something made them, something with patience, something that didn't fear death. You remember when we found the calf buried beneath ice with no sign of trauma? This feels like the grown-up version of that. But why here? The valley doesn't offer better grazing. There's no fresh water, the terrain is brutal, the only thing it offers is removal. It's far from the migratory paths, off the beaten trail. A place to go when you don't want to be found. Except you keep finding them. You walk slowly through the center of the clearing, heart ticking louder than your footsteps. The wind sighs once and then stops entirely. Everything is motionless. There are no predators here. There are no scavengers, only memory. And the bones that chose to stay. You sit for a while, just sit. There's no other word for it. You don't analyze, you don't measure, you don't interpret. You just feel. It's overwhelming how quiet the valley is, as if everything else in the world has paused out of respect. You look again at the bones aligned toward the ridgeline, and you imagine it happening, the old mammoth walking slowly into the bowl, remembering the stories told in low-frequency rumbles, stopping where the others once stood, using her tusks to nudge snow aside, lowering herself, facing the way they always did, and waiting. The moment catches in your throat, because maybe they didn't die with ceremony, maybe there was no music, but they invented something like it. Burial without tools, goodbye without language. You stand brushing snow from your legs and leave the valley the way you came in, careful not to step too close to the bones. This isn't your place. You were just lucky enough to witness it. The sound reaches you before the sight does, an echoing chorus of low rumbles that feel more like a vibration in your ribs than anything you hear with your ears. You freeze on the slope, every hair on your arms rising despite the layers. Not fear, not quite. Anticipation. Below, in a clearing surrounded by ice-bent birches, two herds of mammoths are meeting. There's no chaos, no trumpeting stampede. Just an eerie stillness as they approach one another step by deliberate step, as if rehearsing for a performance they all somehow know by heart. And in the center of the clearing, almost buried in moss and time, lies a skeleton. Not new, not fresh, old enough that only the heavy bones remain half swallowed by the earth. The tusks are splayed wide. The skull is tipped slightly upward. Grass has begun to grow where the ribs arch toward the sky. But the mammoths have noticed. They form a circle around it, one wide ring of enormous bodies shoulder to shoulder, their breath misting into the cold air in rhythmic pulses. No touching, no vocalizing, just presence, unified and solemn. You crouch behind a tree and hold your breath. It's a vigil, and it's not random. The two herds didn't stumble into each other. They converged from different directions based on the tracks you saw earlier. Their paths were not accidental. They came here for this. And the strangest part, the skeleton is not that of a recent death. It's been there for seasons, maybe decades, possibly longer. And still they remember. Here's your historical fact: studies of elephant populations in Ambosolai have documented inter-herd gatherings at the remains of long-dead individuals. These meetings are not aggressive, not competitive. They are slow, cooperative, and focused around the bones. Individuals are seen tracing the skulls and tusks with their trunks pausing, swaying, emitting soft rumbles. Even unrelated herds seem to participate. So imagine that, but scaled up back into prehistory. Two mammoth herds, meeting not for food, not for dominance, but to remember someone who lay here long ago. A matriarch, maybe. A leader. Someone whose memory still hums in the bones of the herd. Odd fact-break mammoth herds likely had multi-generational social structures, with elder females leading and younger ones learning by imitation. A good matriarch could be the difference between survival and extinction. And when such a leader died, the loss would echo. So perhaps that's who this was. You count 16 mammoths in total, including a handful of calves that peer out from between their mother's legs. No one moves for a long time. The air grows heavy with their silence. Then one by one they approach the skeleton, not all at once, slowly, respectfully, each one tracing the bones with their trunk. Some pause at the tusks. Others rest their heads gently against the curved spine. One calf small, unsure, kneels awkwardly on its front legs beside the skull, mimicking what it sees. Its mother watches, then joins it. Historians still debate whether this behavior qualifies as mourning. Skeptics say it's curiosity, novelty, a chance to manipulate familiar shapes. But others point out how consistent the behavior is. How calm, how deliberate. What animal seeks out the remains of its kind just to stand near them? You remember when we talked about the polished tusks and standing stones? This is the same behavior played out not in ivory and stone, but in presence. And maybe, just maybe, it's not just memory. Maybe it's teaching. These herds are passing something on. Not through speech, not through writing, but through action. The calves are watching, learning, feeling. This is how you say goodbye. This is how you remember. And so it continues until the sun dips behind the ridge, painting the snow in bruised purples and peach. Then almost in unison, the mammoths begin to move. Not rushed, not alarmed, just done. They leave in opposite directions, returning the way they came, the way they always do. But something lingers in the clearing, a warmth, a weight. You step forward only after the last shadow disappears. The skeleton lies quiet again, but somehow honored. It doesn't matter how long ago this mammoth died. They still remember. And now, so do you. The bones point east. That's the first thing you notice. You're standing in a shallow basin, not unlike the others, windswept, frost-stilled, lonely. But the orientation of the mammoth remains here isn't random. There's a precision to it. A quiet geometry that slips past your logic and taps directly at your chest. The skulls tilt toward the horizon where the sun would rise. The spines curve gently in the same direction. The tusks arc like cradles turned toward a promise. It's not just one, it's all of them. They face the sunrise. You walk slowly between the bones, careful not to disturb the crusted snow, noting the alignment. The bodies, half buried or collapsed into the permafrost, seem as though they died while watching something sacred climb out of the darkness. Coincidence? Could be, but not if you believe in pattern. And let's be honest, after everything you've seen, do you really believe this much order just happens? Here's your historical fact at multiple mammoth sites across Eurasia. Skeletons have been found in consistent orientations, especially toward the east. The exact significance is unknown, but the recurrence is notable. It's not just topography. It's not just river paths. Something about facing the dawn mattered. Historians still debate whether this alignment was a result of natural conditions, wind, snow, sun, or a deliberate choice by the mammoths themselves, or more controversially by the humans who found them and chose to bury them this way. But let's lean into that debate for a moment. Because what if neither was entirely responsible? What if it was cultural? Not ours, theirs. You remember when humans began burying their dead facing east? It's an ancient impulse common in multiple cultures. Why? Because the east is where the sun rises, where light returns, where things begin again. It's a direction filled with hope. And here, surrounded by bones hundreds of centuries old, you feel it again. Odd fact-break mammoths had a small gland above their eyes that may have helped them track light cycles essential in polar regions where days and nights can stretch for weeks. That means they could sense orientation even in twilight. They knew where the sun was, even when they couldn't see it. You crouch by one skeleton near the edge of the basin. Its skull, is almost fully intact and one tusk shortened by wear is chipped at the tip. It stares toward the horizon. You trace the imagined line from its hollow eye socket out toward the rising sun, and you wonder, did it turn this way in its last moments? Did it die waiting for the dawn? Or did others turn it gently after it had fallen? You lean back and look around. Nothing here feels accidental. The bones speak of purpose, of ritual. Maybe not one we understand, maybe not one we ever will, but it's a comfort somehow. The idea that even in the frozen dark there were those who sought the light, who faced their final moments turned not toward the cold night behind them, but toward the coming glow. You lie down for a moment just beside the ancient ribs and align yourself the same way, east. The snow presses cold through your coat, but you don't mind. You close your eyes and listen to the wind. It whispers, the same way it must have whispered when this mammoth lay down. When the others paused, trunks lowered, and stood in a ring of silence. When they waited, when they remembered, you open your eyes again. The sky is just starting to glow pale. The direction was no accident, and neither was the care. You arrived too late, not just by a day or a week, but by an epoch. The valley is empty now, not abandoned, just done. The mammoths are gone. The snow here is untouched, no fresh prints, no lingering breath fog on the air. The last of them left long before your time. And yet, you stand at the center of what they left behind. Bones, of course. That's expected, but they aren't scattered like before. This isn't a graveyard in the usual sense. There are no collapsed skeletons, no clusters of jumbled remains from a herd caught in a storm. Instead, there's a spiral, a precise, deliberate curl of tusks, ribs, and skulls laid out in a coil that wraps inward like the chamber of a nautilus. You've seen spirals in nature before, ferns, shells, hurricanes, but never made of bone. The spiral begins wide tusks arcing like doorways, then tightens, coiling down toward a single skull at its core. A large one. A matriarch's most likely. Her hollow eye sockets gazing skyward. Her tusks cracked but dignified. You walk its edge in silence. The spiral is too exact to be random. Too consistent. No rockfall could do this. No river current. This was shaped by memory, by movement, by some ritual long lost to the wind. And here's the thing. There are no signs of violence, no tool marks, no predator trails, no bones split for marrow. Whatever happened here, it wasn't a massacre. It wasn't a hunt. It was a leaving. A final moment that no one witnessed until now. Here's your historical fact in at least one Siberian site. Archaeologists uncovered a similar formation. A loose spiral of mammoth bones with no human artifacts nearby. No flint shards, no hearths, no spears. They don't know who made it, or why. Historians still debate whether the arrangement was natural, a result of wind and erosion over centuries, or an intentional act by Ice Age people. But the absence of any human trace complicates the narrative, and even if humans were involved, why a spiral? Odd fact time, elephants have been observed making circles around dying or dead herd members. Not always perfect circles, but the behavior repeats across herds and environments. They don't just gather, they rotate, as if movement itself is part of the ritual. So now imagine that instinct deepened across generations. What would happen if they began to remember the shape? Not just repeat it, but refine it. What if this spiral is their signature, their final monument? You step carefully inside the coil, following the path inward like a labyrinth. Every few meters, another bone greets you, a cracked femur, a flattened pelvis, the long sweep of a jaw. It's quiet, heavier than before. There's no grief in the air, no mourning. That was done already. This place isn't about sadness. It's about completion. You remember when we saw the mother standing over her calf refusing to leave? This is the opposite of that. This is what happens after. The final act. The last gesture before the cold reclaims everything. You reach the center. The matriarch's skull rests on a bed of stone, not ice. as if she or someone cleared the snow before she lay down. Her tusks point outward, mirroring the first arc of the spiral. Her jaw is slightly open, like she's telling you something. You kneel beside her, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of respect, out of gratitude. Because even though they're gone, they left this. Not for you exactly, but it still reached you. And you realize something quietly devastating. We didn't witness their extinction. We arrived after the silence. But still they left a story. Not written, not sung, just shaped. And that spiral, it means they knew they were ending. They didn't just vanish. They said goodbye. You return at last to the place where it all began. The field of bones you first mistook for a battlefield. Now you know better. Now you see it clearly, not as chaos, but as choreography. Every tusk, every rib, every careful stillness has a meaning you were too noisy to hear before. You stand in the middle of it. The cold breath of evening curling past your cheeks, and you realize what's been tugging at you all along. This isn't about death. It's about remembrance. The mammoths didn't build pyramids. They didn't draw on cave walls. They didn't chisel names into tablets or raise tombstones in grief. But they had something else. They had each other. The bodies here are not abandoned. They're placed, aligned. Some curled into gentle arcs, others settled near the stones that rise just high enough to catch the dawn. It's burial without a shovel, goodbye without a grave, love without a word. You walk slowly now, like you've been granted a kind of reverent backstage pass to a show you weren't invited to but were still allowed to witness. You don't speak. You don't whistle or shuffle or reach for your camera. You just listen, and somehow the field listens back. Here's your final historical fact. Some researchers propose that mammoths didn't just remember routes or herds, but individuals. That their bonds extended not only to kin but to friends. That they knew names not in sound but in scent, in memory, in presence. They remembered. Historians still debate how close those emotional capacities came to our own, whether their mourning was ritual or reflex. Whether their movements formed a culture or were simply inherited instinct. But after everything you've seen, that debate feels like it misses the point. Because something deep and old lived here. Something that knew how to grieve. You crouch by a pair of crossed tusks, delicately arranged, not crushed. You imagine a mammoth arriving after days of walking. Not with urgency, but with purpose. Not hunted, not starving, just ready. She lays herself down beside these bones. She rests her trunk across the place where a sister once lay. She doesn't need to speak. She's come home. Odd fact to carry with you the DNA of the last mammoths. Those that lived on Wrangel Island long after their mainland cousins vanish shows a drop in diversity, yes, but also a kind of resilience. They held on even when the world stopped needing them. Even in isolation, they remembered how to be mammoths. And now they're gone. But they didn't leave us nothing. They left us spirals in the snow. Circles of tusks. Trails worn smooth by grief. Pits that held more than bones. Stones that marked more than space. They buried each other with memory and with movement. And in that way, yes, they invented their own burial sites. Not with tools, not with temples, but with love. And now, you stand very still in the gathering dark. The hush of ancient silence wrapping around you like a blanket. The wind begins to rise not in warning but in song. A low, slow lullaby through the bones. You close your eyes, and for a second, you can almost hear the rumbles again. The footfalls, the farewells, the last warm breath of a mother on her calf's cheek before she lets go. You open your eyes. The stars are bright above, blinking over a world that once held giants, and now holds only you. So hush, let the field sleep. Let memory be enough. The mammoths are gone. But they did not vanish without a trace. They left behind more than bones, they left behind intention. A pattern of farewell carved into snowstone and silence. Across the frozen world, from riverbeds to wind-swept hills, their remains speak not of chaos but of care. Herds returning to mourn. Mothers standing vigil. Elders walking alone not because they were lost, but because they remembered where they were meant to end. Some bones were arranged. Some were polished by trunks. Some were tucked beneath earth or left facing east toward the light. Again and again the signs whisper the same thing: someone cared where this one lay. We may never be sure what these great creatures truly felt. The line between ritual and instinct is still fogged with time. But the evidence hums beneath the ice. Mammoths remembered. They returned. They gathered. They said goodbye in their own way. No tools, no monuments, no language, just presence, just love. And perhaps that is enough. So now, as the wind curls through the quiet hollows and the last echoes fade, let this be your memory too. Close your eyes, breathe. The giants walked here, and they left peace in their wake.